The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Rainbow Diner, casting warm shadows across the worn leather booths and chrome-trimmed tables. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as the breakfast crowd buzzed with their usual morning chatter. Among them sat Staff Sergeant David Chen, enjoying his routine morning coffee after his dawn workout. 26 years of military service had taught Chen to stay alert even during peaceful moments. As he stirred his coffee, his eyes naturally scanned the room, an old habit from his 3 tours overseas. That's when he noticed them. A young girl, maybe 14 or 15, sitting across from an older man in a pressed business suit. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The man was well-dressed, speaking softly, and even smiled at the waitress when she refilled their water glasses. The girl wore neat clothes, a blue sweater and jeans, and had her hair carefully braided. But something felt off. Chen watched as the girl raised her hand to adjust her hair. Her fingers moved in an unusual pattern, 3 quick gestures that he'd recently learned about during a base security briefing. She repeated the motion while pretending to scratch her neck. Chen's pulse quickened as he recognized the signal, the viral TikTok SOS gesture that had been making rounds on social media, designed specifically for people needing help to discreetly alert others. The Marine's mind raced back to last month's training session. Their instructor had shown them various videos of the hand signal, 3 simple steps that could mean the difference between safety and danger. First, palm facing forward, then tucking the thumb in, finally closing the fingers over the thumb. It seemed casual enough to go unnoticed by most people, but for those who knew what to look for, it was as clear as a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Taking another sip of his coffee, Chen maintained his relaxed posture while closely observing their interaction. The man checked his expensive watch repeatedly, his eyes darting to the diner's entrance every time the bell chimed. He noticed how the man kept one hand on the girl's backpack, which sat between them in the booth. When the waitress asked the girl what she'd like for breakfast, the man jumped in to answer, ordering plain toast and water. The girl's eyes remained fixed on her lap. Something else caught Chen's attention. Whenever the girl shifted in her seat, the man's friendly demeanor would crack slightly, his jaw tightening and his hand gripping the backpack a little tighter. To most people, these might seem like normal gestures between a father and daughter, but Chen's instincts, honed by years of reading potentially dangerous situations, told him otherwise. He thought about his own niece back home, about the same age as this girl. The thought of her being in a similar situation made his stomach turn. But he knew that rushing in without a plan could make things worse. As he watched the girl make the signal for the 3rd time while pretending to fix her collar, Chen's training kicked in. He needed to act, but smartly. Pulling out his phone, he typed a quick message to himself, making it look like he was checking emails. In reality, he was documenting everything he'd observed, descriptions, behaviors, the exact hand signals. His mind was already formulating a plan. The diner's layout offered only 2 exits, the main entrance and the kitchen door. The man had chosen a booth with a clear view of both. The next few moments would be crucial. Chen knew he needed to alert the staff without raising suspicion. He couldn't risk the man noticing and rushing the girl out of the diner. As he watched them over the rim of his coffee cup, he thought about all the missing persons reports he'd seen shared on local news lately. How many of those people had tried to signal for help, only to have their signs go unnoticed? The Marine supple shifted in his seat, keeping his movements casual as he noted more details. The girl's designer backpack looked new, but she kept tugging at her sweater sleeves as if they weren't her clothes. The man's wedding ring didn't match the tan line on his finger, and despite the cool morning, sweat beaded on his forehead. As the breakfast rush continued around them, Chen felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Whatever was happening at that table wasn't right, and he was probably the only person in the diner who had noticed the girl's silent plea for help. Now he had to figure out how to respond without putting her in more danger. Staff Sergeant Chen took another slow sip of his coffee, letting the warm liquid steady his nerves as he continued his careful observation. His years of military training had taught him to notice the small things, the tiny details that most people miss in their rush through daily life. Right now, those details were painting a disturbing picture. The girl's movements caught his attention again. While she appeared calm on the surface, her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her water glass. Her shoulders remained tense, drawn up toward her ears in a defensive posture that Chen had seen too many times in conflict zones. She kept her eyes down, only glancing up quickly when addressed, like a rabbit ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The man's behavior was even more telling. Despite his polished appearance and easy smile, his actions screamed control. Every time the girl's phone buzzed, his hand would shoot up to check it before she could reach for it. "Just making sure it's not spam," he'd said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. The waitress smiled politely, but Chen noticed how the girl's fingers curled into tight fists under the table. When another customer walked past their booth, the man shifted closer to the girl, his casual movement masking how he effectively blocked her path out. "Scoot over, honey," he said, his voice friendly but firm. The girl complied immediately, her movements mechanical, rehearsed. Chen recognized that kind of immediate obedience. It came from fear, not respect. The breakfast rush was in full swing now, with plates clattering and conversations filling the air. The man kept checking his watch, his foot tapping an impatient rhythm under the table. He barely touched his own coffee, but he'd made sure the girl finished her entire glass of water. "Drink up," he'd insisted. "We have a long drive ahead." That comment made Chen's ears perk up. He noticed how the girl's face had fallen at the mention of a drive. Her hand had moved to her neck again, fingers forming that same desperate SOS signal while pretending to adjust her collar. The motion was subtle, almost undetectable unless you knew what to look for. The man's phone rang, and he stepped away from the table to take the call. Chen watched as he paced near the entrance, speaking in hushed tones. The girl remained frozen in her seat, but her eyes darted toward the exit, then quickly back to her lap. It was clear she knew better than to try running, or had learned from previous attempts. Using his phone's reflection, Chen studied the man's body language during the call. The pleasant mask slipped for a moment, revealing flashes of irritation and urgency. "We're still on schedule," he muttered into the phone, glancing at his watch again. "No delays. Yes, everything's under control." Those words sent a chill down Chen's spine. They reminded him of a recent briefing about trafficking patterns, how perpetrators often worked in networks, keeping strict schedules for moving people across state lines. The girl's designer clothes suddenly seemed more like a disguise than a fashion choice, probably picked to help them blend in at nice restaurants and hotels. When the man returned to the table, he began gathering their things with barely contained impatience. "Time to hit the road, sweetie," he announced, his voice carrying that same artificial warmth. The girl's hands shook as she reached for her jacket, and Chen noticed something else. A small tattoo on the man's wrist became visible as his sleeve rode up. It looked fresh, possibly done within the last few days. Chen's mind raced through his options. Direct confrontation could put the girl in danger. If the man felt cornered, there was no telling what he might do. The Marine had seen enough combat situations to know that the wrong move now could make everything worse. He needed to be strategic, to think 3 steps ahead like in a chess game where the stakes were literally life and death. The diner's security cameras hummed quietly in their corners, their red lights blinking like tiny watchful eyes. Chen had noticed them earlier, standard equipment, but potentially valuable allies in this situation. He knew from his military surveillance training that even cheap security systems these days could capture clear enough footage for facial recognition. As he weighed his next move, Chen thought about his own daughter back home, safely asleep in her bed. The thought strengthened his resolve. Whatever was happening here, he wouldn't, let this girl disappear into another statistic. Like the instructor in his trafficking awareness course had said, sometimes the only thing standing between a victim and safety is one person willing to trust their instincts and take action. Staff Sergeant Chen knew the next few minutes would be crucial. His napkin order pad lay in front of him, and with steady hands, he began writing a note. The wooden pencil felt unusually heavy as he carefully chose his words. Table 12. Girl making TikTok SOS distress signal. Man controlling her movements. Please call law enforcement discreetly. Marine at counter-watching situation. He glanced at his watch, 8:47 a.m. The breakfast crowd was thinning out, which meant fewer witnesses but also fewer distractions if things went wrong. The elderly waitress who'd been serving his coffee all morning passed by again, as sensible shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum floor. "Could I get my check, please?" Chen asked quietly, sliding the folded note beneath his coffee cup. He tapped it twice with his index finger, maintaining eye contact with the waitress. Her eyes flickered to the note, then back to his face. 20 years of serving in this diner had taught her to read people well, and something in Chen's expression made her pause. She picked up the cup and note in one smooth motion, reading it behind her order pad as she walked toward the kitchen. Chen watched her shoulders stiffen slightly. She understood. No screaming, no rushing, just a supple nod as she disappeared through the swinging doors. The man at table 12 was getting more restless. His leg bounced under the table, making the silverware rattle slightly. "The service here is so slow," he complained loudly, clearly trying to create a reason for leaving. The girl's eyes remained fixed on her untouched toast, her fingers still making that supple distress signal every few minutes. Chen pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while actually opening his camera. He snapped a few discreet photos of the man's face when he turned to look for the waitress. The girl's safety would depend on having clear evidence later. His military training kicked in as he mentally recorded every detail: approximate height, weight, distinguishing features, clothing description. Through the kitchen's round window, Chen could see the waitress talking urgently but calmly to the cook, who nodded and stepped into the back office. The diner's owner, a former Navy cook himself, would understand the severity of the situation. The security cameras would be recording everything now, their footage potentially crucial for what was to come. Minutes ticked by like hours. Chen ordered another coffee, keeping his movements relaxed and natural while positioning himself to block the main exit if needed. He noticed the owner quietly asking other customers to settle their bills, gradually clearing the diner without causing alarm. The remaining staff moved with purposeful casualness, their practiced smiles masking their awareness of the unfolding situation. The man's phone buzzed again. This time, his whispered conversation carried hints of panic. "We're leaving now." "Yes, right now," he hissed, reaching for the girl's backpack. Chen's muscles tensed, ready to move, but he forced himself to remain seated. Rushing in too soon could put the girl in more danger. Through the front windows, Chen spotted a dark blue sedan pulling into the far end of the parking lot, an unmarked police car. Two more vehicles parked on the side street, positioning themselves strategically around the diner. The cavalry had arrived, but timing would be everything. The owner appeared with a pot of fresh coffee, moving from table to table, subtly directing the remaining customers away from the potential conflict zone. His voice carried clearly across the diner as he chatted about the weather and local sports, helping maintain an atmosphere of normalcy. Chen watched the girl's face as she noticed the gradual changes in the diner. A flicker of hope crossed her features before she quickly suppressed it. The man was too focused on his phone to notice the subtle shifts happening around him, too preoccupied with his own plans unraveling. The waitress approached their table one last time, deliberately slow with the check. "Is everything all right with your meal?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. The girl's hands trembled as she made the SOS signal one more time, more desperately now, perhaps sensing that help was near. Chen's hand moved to his pocket, where he kept his military ID. Years of training and experience had taught him that the next few moments would be critical. Whatever happened, that girl wouldn't be leaving with that man. The pieces were in place, the trap was set, and justice was about to be served with the same efficiency that the diner served its morning coffee. The next few moments unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. As plainclothed officers entered the diner, spreading out among the remaining customers, the weight of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The morning sun caught the badge partially visible under one officer's jacket as she casually ordered coffee at the counter. Through the front window, Chen watched two more police cars quietly roll into position behind the building. The officers moved with practiced precision, blocking potential escape routes without drawing attention. Years of similar operations had taught them the importance of staying invisible until the last possible moment. The man at table 12 was too absorbed in his phone to notice the subtle changes around him, but the girl had grown increasingly still, like a deer sensing approaching hunters. Her eyes darted between the new customers, a tiny spark of recognition flickering across her face as she spotted the concealed weapons beneath their casual jackets. The lead detective, a tall woman with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a neat bun, sat down at the counter next to Chen. Without looking directly at him, she whispered, "3 states. We've been tracking him for weeks." Her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup, but her other hand stayed close to her hip. The pieces started falling into place. Security footage from gas stations across state lines. Missing person reports that didn't quite add up. Credit card transactions that created a trail from Oregon to California. The man's recent phone calls suddenly made more sense. He wasn't just anxious about a schedule, he was part of a larger network. The detective's tablet displayed a series of photos, different girls, different cities, but the same man. Always well-dressed, always smiling that practiced smile. Hotel security cameras had caught him in Seattle, Portland, and now Sacramento. Each time with a different young person, each time with the same story about being their father. The girl's real family had been searching desperately for 2 weeks. Their daughter had disappeared after school one day, leaving behind a half-finished math assignment and a worried text to her best friend about meeting someone who promised to help with her modeling career. The last trace of her had been captured by a traffic camera in Portland, sitting in the passenger seat of a dark SUV. Chen watched as more details emerged on the detective's screen. The man's wedding ring was stolen, part of his carefully crafted image. The designer clothes he made the girls wear were bought with fake credit cards. Even his business cards, which claimed he was a talent scout, were printed on paper traced back to a known trafficking operation. The waitress passed by again, this time dropping a photo on the counter. It showed the man's car parked behind the diner, its license plate clearly visible. The owner had managed to get the shot while taking out the morning trash, his years in the Navy showing in his attention to detail. The girl's phone buzzed again, but this time the sound carried a different weight. The detective nodded slightly. Her team had already traced the number. Every call, every text was now being monitored, creating a web of evidence that would soon trap not just this man, but his entire network. More photos appeared on the tablet. A small apartment in Portland where other girls had been held, bus tickets purchased with stolen credit cards, surveillance footage from a dozen different cities. The detectives' team had been building this case methodically, piece by piece, waiting for the perfect moment to move in. The man checked his watch again, running his hands through his hair in growing agitation. The carefully maintained facade was starting to crack. His phone kept buzzing with messages from his accomplices, each one increasing his anxiety. The girl noticed his distraction and made the SOS signal one more time, stronger now, more desperate. Chen observed as an officer by the door quietly spoke into his radio, confirming positions. Another officer, dressed as a truck driver, positioned himself near the kitchen exit. The net was tightening, but the hardest part was still to come. They needed to make the arrest without endangering the girl or any of the remaining customers. The detective's tablet showed one final image, a map dotted with red pins, each representing a suspected trafficking location. Taking down this one man wouldn't end the problem, but it would break open a case that spanned the entire West Coast. Those red pins represented dozens of young lives interrupted, families torn apart, and communities shattered by fear. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor, Chen realized he was witnessing more than just an arrest. This was about restoring hope, about showing that sometimes a simple gesture, like a hand signal learned from social media, could set in motion events that would save not just one life, but many. The moment of action arrived with the quiet grace of a winter sunrise. Through the diner's windows, the morning light painted long shadows across the floor as the lead detective gave the signal, a casual adjustment of her coffee cup. Chen watched as years of training and preparation came together in seconds. The man at table 12 stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "We need to leave," he announced, reaching for the girl's arm. Before his fingers could make contact, the carefully orchestrated plan sprang into motion. "Police, don't move." The words rang out clear and firm as officers emerged from their positions throughout the diner. Their movements were swift but controlled, practiced countless times in training. The man froze, his face shifting from confusion to realization to fear in the span of heartbeat. Chen was already moving, placing himself between the man and the girl. His military training took over as he calmly said, "Sir, please place your hands where we can see them." The girl remained perfectly still, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and hope. The lead detective approached with measured steps, her badge now visible. "You have the right to remain silent," she began, her voice steady and professional. 2 officers moved in to secure the man while others cleared the remaining customers from the area, their actions precise and rehearsed. The diner's owner stood by the kitchen door, keeping his staff safely back while providing a clear path for the officers. The elderly waitress who had first received Chen's note watched from behind the counter, her hands clasped together in prayer. As handcuffs clicked into place, the girl finally let out a small sob, not of fear, but of relief. A female officer with gentle eyes approached her, keeping her movements slow and predictable. "You're safe now," she said softly, draping a warm blanket around the girl's shoulders. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." The man began to protest, spinning tales about being the girl's father, about a family emergency, about a misunderstanding. But his words fell flat against the wall of evidence the police had gathered. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket, each message now another piece of evidence for the prosecution. Outside, more police cars arrived, their lights silent but their presence commanding. Neighbors from nearby shops stepped out to watch, drawn by the quiet but intense activity. The girl was carefully escorted to a waiting victim services van where counselors were ready to provide immediate support. Chen observed as the detectives' team photographed everything: the table, the backpack, the half-eaten breakfast that told its own story of interrupted plans. Each detail would become part of the case file, each piece of evidence another step toward justice. The man's face had lost its friendly mask, revealing the cold calculation beneath. As officers led him to a waiting police car, his expensive suit and polished shoes couldn't hide the truth anymore. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled in the face of coordinated action and community vigilance. Inside the diner, the owner began brewing fresh coffee for the officers who would spend the next few hours processing the scene. The elderly waitress shared security footage from the diner's cameras, her hands steady as she pointed out key moments from the morning. Each person had played their part in this rescue, from the smallest gesture to the final arrest. The female officer sat with the girl in the victim services van, speaking softly and offering water. Years of experience had taught her the importance of these first moments of freedom. The girl clutched the blanket tightly, her fingers finally still after hours of making that desperate signal for help. Chen gave his statement to a young officer, detailing everything he had observed. His military training had taught him the value of precise reporting. Every detail could make a difference in court. But beyond the professional exterior, his heart ached thinking about his own daughter, safe at home. The morning sun had climbed higher now, washing the scene in bright light. Local news vans began arriving, drawn by the police activity, but officers kept them at a respectful distance. This story would be told, but not at the expense of a young girl's privacy and recovery. The lead detective made phone calls, her voice carrying notes of both satisfaction and determination. This arrest would lead to others, each one another step toward dismantling the larger network. Already, teams in other cities were moving into position, ready to act on the information they'd gathered. As the scene wound down, the diner's regular customers began returning, drawn by both concern and curiosity. The owner greeted them with free coffee, turning what could have been a day of tragedy into one of community triumph. The elderly waitress shared knowing looks with Chen. They had all been part of something important, something that went beyond their normal daily routines. The girl's phone, now in evidence, lit up with a message from her real family. They were already on their way, tears of joy and relief flowing freely as they drove down the interstate. Soon, she would be home, surrounded by genuine love and support, her nightmare finally over. In the days following the rescue at Rainbow Diner, the ripples of that morning's events spread far beyond Sacramento's city limits. The local police station buzzed with activity as evidence mounted and connections emerged. Detective phones rang constantly as tips poured in from neighboring states, each call adding another piece to the puzzle. The man's arrest had cracked open a network that sprawled across the West Coast. His phone, now in police custody, proved to be a goldmine of information. Text messages, contact lists, and location data painted a picture of organized trafficking routes that had gone undetected for months. Each piece of evidence led to new arrests, new rescues. 3 days after the diner incident, police raids in Portland uncovered a safe house where other young people had been held. The building looked ordinary from the outside, a typical apartment in a quiet neighborhood. But inside, investigators found fake IDs, multiple phones, and evidence linking to similar operations in Seattle and Los Angeles. The elderly waitress from the diner visited the police station to provide additional testimony. She brought security footage showing the man had visited the diner before, always with different young people. Her careful observations helped investigators identify 2 more missing teens who had been moved through Sacramento. Staff Sergeant Chen worked closely with the investigation team, his military experience proving valuable in mapping out the network's movement patterns. He could see how they had used major highways, choosing small towns and quiet diners as stopping points, places where people might notice something wrong, but wouldn't know how to help. The girl's story became a turning point for local law enforcement training. The detective who led the arrest developed a new program teaching officers about subtle distress signals, including the TikTok SOS gesture that had started it all. Sometimes the smallest sign can save a life, she would tell her classes, using secured footage from the diner as a teaching tool. Local businesses began requesting training sessions. The diner's owner hosted the first workshop, gathering restaurant staff from across the city. They learned about warning signs, proper reporting procedures, and the importance of trusting their instincts. The elderly waitress shared her experience, her voice steady as she explained how a simple folded note had set everything in motion. The investigation revealed how the traffickers had used social media to target young people, promising modeling contracts and entertainment opportunities. Police worked with school counselors to develop awareness programs, teaching students about online safety and the importance of verifying opportunities through proper channels. Chen's military base incorporated the case into their community awareness training. They emphasized how ordinary people, a Marine having coffee, a waitress doing her job, a diner owner taking out trash, could work together to prevent crime. The base commander called it civilian-military cooperation at its finest. News of the rescue spread through law enforcement channels. Other police departments reached out to learn about the coordination between the diner staff, Chen, and the officers. The lead detective shared their protocols, emphasizing how calm preparation had prevented the situation from turning dangerous. The district attorney's office worked overtime building cases against each arrested member of the network. Evidence mounted, financial records showing suspicious patterns, hotel bookings under false names, and surveillance footage from dozens of locations. Each new discovery strengthened their cases and led to more arrests. Community support poured in for the rescued young people. Local counseling services offered free therapy sessions. Business owners provided job training opportunities. A nearby community college established a scholarship fund. People wanted to help to be part of turning tragedy into hope. The diner itself became a symbol of community vigilance. Regular customers brought friends, sharing the story in hushed, respectful tones. The elderly waitress noticed people paying more attention to their surroundings, watching out for each other in ways they hadn't before. Police departments in neighboring cities began implementing similar training programs. They created quick response protocols for reports of trafficking, emphasizing the importance of civilian cooperation. Officers learned to look for subtle signs, a hand signal, a nervous glance, a story that didn't quite add up. Chen kept in touch with the investigation team, providing insights from his military experience. He helped identify patterns in the network's movements, showing how they had adapted tactics similar to those used by smuggling operations he'd encountered overseas. The girl's brave signal for help had started something much bigger than anyone expected. What began as one rescue in a small diner had grown into a movement of awareness and action. Police tip lines reported increased calls about suspicious behavior. More people were paying attention, ready to help if needed. As spring turned to summer, the investigation continued to expand. Each new arrest led to more information, more rescues, more families reunited. The network that had once operated in shadows was being dismantled piece by piece, all because someone had noticed a silent cry for help over morning coffee. 6 months after that fateful morning at Rainbow Diner, the impact of one simple hand gesture continued to create positive changes throughout the community. The diner had become more than just a local breakfast spot. It was now a symbol of hope and awareness, a reminder that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. The elderly waitress still worked her morning shift, pouring coffee with the same careful attention she'd shown that day. But now she noticed how customers watched their surroundings more carefully, how they paid attention to each other in ways they hadn't before. Young people would come in specifically to thank her, sharing stories of how the incident had inspired them to speak up about their own concerns. Staff Sergeant Chen had been invited to speak at local schools and community centers. He always started his talks the same way. "I'm not a hero," he would say, "I just paid attention." Students listened intently as he explained how social media awareness had helped save a life. His message was simple but powerful. Everyone has the power to help if they know what to look for. The diner's owner had installed a small plaque near the counter, "See something, say something." It wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was a reminder of how one morning had changed everything. Regular customers would point it out to newcomers, sharing the story in respectful tones. The booth where it all happened had become a quiet memorial of sorts, a place where people left encouraging notes for others who might need help. Local businesses had formed a network, sharing information and supporting each other in staying vigilant. The coffee shop across the street hosted monthly community meetings where people could learn about safety and awareness. The bookstore next door kept pamphlets about resources for people in need, displayed discreetly but accessibly. The police department had transformed its approach to community engagement. Officers would stop by the diner regularly, not just for coffee but to chat with customers and staff. They shared updates about their expanded training programs, proud of how their quick response that morning had inspired other departments across the country. The girl's story, shared with her permission and protection of privacy, had become a powerful teaching tool. In schools, counselors used it to discuss online safety and the importance of trusting one's instincts. Young people learned about the hand signals that could save lives, practicing them in safe environments so they would be ready if ever needed. Social media had played a crucial role in spreading awareness. The TikTok SOS signal had gone viral again, this time accompanied by real stories of how it had helped people. Young users created informative videos about safety, sharing resources and encouraging others to stay alert and supportive. Chen's military base had incorporated the incident into their regular training, emphasizing the importance of civilian interaction. Service members learned how their training could help in unexpected ways, how being observant could make a difference even when off duty. The base commander often cited the diner incident as a perfect example of community policing. Local colleges had started offering free self-defense classes and awareness workshops. Students learned not just how to protect themselves, but how to recognize when others might need help. The workshops always included information about subtle distress signals and safe ways to alert authorities. The district attorney's office reported increased community cooperation in other cases. People felt more empowered to report suspicious activities, understanding that their observations could be crucial. The successful prosecution of the trafficking network had shown how civilian tips could help build strong cases. The diner's security cameras had been upgraded, not just for safety but as a symbol of community watchfulness. The owner would often say, "It's not about catching bad guys, it's about preventing bad things from happening in the first place." His words reflected a deeper understanding of how prevention and awareness could protect the community. During holiday seasons, the diner became a collection point for donations to organizations helping young people in crisis. Customers would bring gift cards, warm clothes, and personal care items. The elderly waitress coordinated these efforts, making sure the donations reached those who needed them most. Chen's daughter had started a club at her high school, teaching younger students about online safety and community awareness. She was proud of her father's role in the rescue, but understood that the real hero was the young girl who had been brave enough to ask for help. The lead detective still dropped by the diner for coffee, often bringing new officers to show them where it all began. She would point out how ordinary the scene looked, a regular diner on a regular morning, and explain how awareness and quick thinking had changed so many lives. As the year drew to a close, the diner prepared for a small ceremony marking the anniversary of the rescue. There would be no grand speeches or media coverage, just community members coming together to remember how one small gesture of hope had grown into a movement of awareness and support. The elderly waitress would serve coffee, Chen would sit at his usual spot at the counter, and together they would celebrate the power of paying attention and taking action.